Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this webinar on best practice knowledge management. My name is Hannah, and it's my pleasure to talk to you today. But before we get stuck in, I just wanted to start with a couple of housekeeping rules for the webinar, which our frequent webinar attendees will be familiar with, so bear with me. If you are new to GoToWebinar, you'll notice a small orange arrow at the top right-hand side of the screen. Now, this is your GoToWebinar panel, and you can use this to expand and collapse the panel box. Most of the time, we advise to keep it collapsed. However, if you do have a question or something that you'd like to contribute throughout the webinar, open this box and submit it into the question area. And I have my colleague Amy here with me today, who's going to be answering your questions live. And I'm hoping at the end as well we'll have some time to share some questions and answer them with the rest of the group as well. So please contribute as much as you can. So, best practice knowledge management. Now, this is a subject that we see is more relevant today for service delivery than it ever has been before. Why is this? Well, it's mainly because of the increase in demands that we see coming into service desks and service delivery departments. You essentially are expected to do a lot more, but with a lot less resources and a lot less time. Now, what kind of demands are we talking about here? I thought we'd isolate a few, and as we're going through them, have a think if these are demands that you hear of your service desk or that have come to your attention recently. Some demands come from the customer. Things such as the expectation of 24/7 support. The customer really does expect to be able to go somewhere and access help and support for their queries any time of day. Customers also expect to be very self-sufficient, and I was working recently with a bank who put this really well into words with an example that I thought I'd share with you. They were talking about how the banking industry has changed over the years. So back in the day, for example, you would actually physically walk into the bank in order to get some money out or to do a transaction. This later evolved into going to ATMs and withdrawing cash from there, whereas now we don't actually need to leave our house to do banking. We do the majority of it online through mobile apps. We even pay through our mobile phone. All of it makes us very self-sufficient. And this is the kind of service not only that the customers of this bank expect externally, but their internal customers expect this as well. Customers also expect much quicker response times. They don't want to be kept waiting. They want the first person they speak to be knowledgeable and hopefully answer their query straight away, so minimal escalations. And they also have expectations around the duration that they want to be kept waiting. It's not okay nowadays to be got back to after days or weeks on end. They expect things to be swift, and that's a lot to take on board. The business as well has certain demands of you as a service desk. Now, some of them are shared with the customer. For example, minimal escalations and shorter durations definitely make sense to the business too. It helps them keep that balance of time and cost down, makes them more efficient, and ends up saving them money. The business also expects you as a department to be professional at all times. Now, this relates to things such as being consistent in the way that you handle queries. I don't know if anyone has experienced this, where you can have a query be answered by an individual with a couple of words from one person and maybe a very long explanation from another person. Now, neither one is necessarily right or wrong, but they're not consistent. And that's part of being professional, is putting out that consistent way of working. You're also expected to make an outstanding impression of your department. So it's really seen as a partner within your business rather than an add-on. And finally, the business, on top of all of that, expects you to be proactive. They don't want you to waste time on repetitive calls or waste calls, as we call them. They want you to spend more time on those proactive processes, such as problem management, investigations into root cause analysis, implementing projects that will make improvements to service delivery, proactive things rather than firefighting all the time. And if you have time to breathe by the end of getting your head around all of these demands, then you're doing well, because there's such high expectations. But the good thing is that best practice knowledge management really has a direct influence on every single one of these areas. Now, I know it almost sounds too good to be true, but its effects are so far-reaching, and they really touch so many different areas of service delivery. It's one of the reasons that I became enthusiastic about the subject. I really was quite amazed about how many different areas you could improve just by changing one small thing, which is the way you manage knowledge. Just as a quick introduction, my name is Hannah. I'm a service management consultant for Topdesk. And I recently started noticing this trend in best practice knowledge management when Topdesk implemented it internally a few years ago. And I instantly noticed the differences at a very personal level in terms of the knowledge articles I was accessing and the information that I felt empowered to use. We then, we tried to, as well as practice what we preach, also bring this improvements to other organisations. So we started implementing best practice knowledge management at countries throughout the Netherlands and now in the UK as well. And the statistics that we're getting, they really speak for themselves. So getting quite significant drops in the number of the volume of instance coming in the first place. So obviously freeing up a lot of time. We're seeing the duration of incidents drop, sometimes by as much as a third for some organizations, just by changing the way they manage knowledge. We're seeing less time spent on the resolution of incidents, but my favorite statistics are the last two, the ones around freeing up time to be able to implement those proactive processes and also becoming more professional as a department, because you've really got a consistent way of dealing with queries and the way you communicate with your customer. So it all sounds, as I say, too good to be true. So I really would like to explain the idea behind best practice knowledge management today, and we've broken it down into a few different areas that we're going to cover so that hopefully you can take this away to your business as well and see some of these improvements. So we've already talked about the inspiration for best practice knowledge management, the demands that you see and the statistics that will that back up this new process. We're next going to delve into the theory behind best practice knowledge management. There is quite a lot of theory. It's a bit like going back to school and having to learn a bit of a different way of working, but there's a lot of research that backs it up, and I do want to share some of that with you. We're then going to go into the practical side of looking at the process, the tool, and how you can manage the people using the new process. And finally, we'll finish off with some applications that you can take away with you, things like how to deal with common objections and some starting points to take you on the road to best practice knowledge management. So let's kick off with a bit of theory into shift left. Now, if you have been to any Topdesk webinars or any Topdesk resources before, you'll know that shift left really is something that we talk about a lot. So I don't want to spend too much time on this particular area. If this is something you would like to know more about, we actually have a whole dedicated webinar on shift left, so check out the Topdesk YouTube page. I'd just like to sum it up by saying shift left is essentially moving the moment of resolution from the right to the left. Simply moving it from your third and second line teams closer to the customer. So that's either by solving things at first line or hopefully even the customer solving things themselves. And there's a nice little phrase that sums that up very well. It's empowering your support staff to resolve their problems independently and bringing solutions that you're providing physically closer to your customers. So that's shift left in a nutshell. Another concept I would like to introduce you to is the concept of KCS, which stands for Knowledge-Centered Support. Now, knowledge-centered support is a proven methodology for the use, validation, improvement, and the creation of knowledge within a business and within a workflow. And this isn't something that Topdesk has designed ourselves, this isn't something that we've come up with. It's actually come from somewhere a lot bigger than us. It's from the Service Innovation Consortium, whose website I'm putting on the screen here. And they actually did a lot of research into this as far back as 1995 and onwards, into this way of working and this way of managing knowledge, which has proven to be highly effective. And it's very different from a traditional way of managing knowledge for a few different reasons. One of the main ones is we usually manage knowledge in a business in a few to many model. The few sort of knowledgeable individuals, usually by means of a knowledge manager, will be the ones who create the knowledge, make decisions about it, and share it amongst the business. Whereas knowledge-centered support is really encouraging a many-to-many model, which means that lots of people have access to the knowledge base, not only to edit, but also to create things and make them from scratch and publish them to the wider business. It also works on a demand-driven principle that knowledge will grow organically depending on demand. So you don't start off making a knowledge base of things that you think will be useful. you actually wait for the use to come and then create the knowledge off the back of them. So you end up with knowledge that's actually only ever going to be incredibly useful because it's come directly from customer demand. It stipulates that knowledge should be self-correcting. This means that in theory, your knowledge base will never ever be complete. It will always be growing and evolving and should constantly be worked on. KCS also has a number of core principles that they abide by, and they've put this into a nice triangle structure here. And I don't want to go through every one of them individually, but I would like to identify the main core one, which is the one in the middle, the principle of trust. Now, having trust to allow many people to edit and work on the knowledge base, trust to allow your operators to have that control onto the content that goes in there, really is the heartbeat of KCS and what will keep it working and strong within your business. So I do want you to remember that core principle of trust because it's kind of going to come up a little bit later in the webinar as well. So that's KCS. And using the concept of shift left and the methodology in KCS, Top Desk has formed BPKM, otherwise known as Best Practice Knowledge Management. And this really is the practical application of all of the theory and research that we have learned. It's a combination of a process used by people and how we can manage those people to take on the process, and the use of a specific tool as well. So let's start off with the process. Now, the process of BPKM is actually remarkably simple, and it starts with the creation of a call. And the first thing that you do when you create that call is search the knowledge base straight away. Hopefully, you find the answer to that question, and hopefully that answer is correct, in which case you use the knowledge article and you close the call. Simple as that, a consistent, easy answer to a question. However, sometimes you might find that the knowledge article isn't correct, maybe it needs updating in some way. So what do? You edit the knowledge article, then you use it, and then you close the call. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Sometimes you might not find the answer to your question, especially if it's early days in your BPKM implementation. So in that case, you solve or you escalate the call as you normally would. You close it off, and then at the point of closure, you take that solution that you have just written to the end user and you add it to the knowledge base. Now, what that means is that the next time that that question comes up, a different operator, or maybe even yourself who's answering that question, they will go through this process, and this time they'll be able to go straight through that first arm of the process that we saw, use the knowledge article, and close the call much quicker. Now, the process is quite simple. It makes sense, but there are some key principles that have to be in place in order for it to work. Now, one of these is that knowledge-based checking really needs to be part of solving every single call. This means that checking the knowledge base is mandatory. It's no longer an optional thing that, oh, maybe I'll do it if I've got time, or I'm a bit busy today, so I won't check the knowledge article for these calls. Every single call should involve the knowledge base in some way. It also means that you should be continually working on those knowledge articles to improve them. Now, we're not just talking about, if you notice something drastically wrong about a knowledge base article that you should then edit it, which of course you should. We're talking about small improvements that just make it easier to understand or easier to follow. So if you think of maybe an extra screenshot that you can add, or a change of wording that will make it clearer, add it, because remember, this is a knowledge base that's evolving organically and growing all the time. It's a good idea to think of the knowledge base in this way as a collective memory, and one of my customers explained this quite nicely, is they kind of think of it as a big shared brain between all of their operators that they all work on and can draw on information together. This actually makes quite a nice atmosphere between your operators, because they feel a sense of ownership for the knowledge base that they're creating, and they really want to make it nice, and they want to make it as full as relevant content as they possibly can. This also means that knowledge management becomes everybody's responsibility. It is no longer the ownership of one or two individuals, traditionally the knowledge managers. Now, sorry for any knowledge managers listening. Sometimes they think, hang on a second, what are you telling me? Does this mean that I don't have anything to do anymore? Well, don't worry, we're going to come back to that topic of the knowledge manager later. But for this process to work, it really does need to be every single operator that has these insights and that is going to be adding content to the knowledge base. And the final point or principle to make this process work is to, wherever possible, publish knowledge to an end user portal. So if it's something that the end user could do themselves, if it's information that's relevant to them, don't just make it for internal use, publish it to your end users as well. And then you really get the benefit of the far left of the shift left scale when you're empowering the end user. So that's the process. It's nothing too overcomplicated, but what you will need is a tool that supports and makes it easy for both your operators and your end users to utilize this beautiful knowledge that you've created. So we're obviously at Topdesk, we're pretty biased into what tool we think that you should use. So I wanted to show you a few kind of key areas that the tool must have to make knowledge sharing easy. But at the end of the day, whatever tool you do use, make sure that it is just the one tool throughout the business in order to make the best use of the process. So for the end users, there must be a very easy way for them to find knowledge or be aware that they can search for knowledge. So in the Topdesk Self-Service portal, we have the search bar along the top. As they navigate through the portal, it must also be easy for them to see the knowledge base even if they're not looking directly for it. So for example, on the right-hand side here, we can see frequently asked questions that are being suggested to them. These will also appear if they're filling out a form, and if they type something in a form, a dynamic search will help them point them into even more relevant knowledge articles as well. So it's really kind of putting in their face knowledge at every step of their journey through the portal. Your operators too, it has to be easy for them to see and use the knowledge base, because otherwise they'll really find it a struggle to follow the process. In Topdesk, we use the More button, which has the Resolve with Knowledge item, and more recently the knowledge-based search at the bottom of a call, which if you search within that, not only is it going to suggest knowledge articles for you based on keywords in the tickets, but it also allows you to easily search for yourself and create brand new knowledge articles from this page as well. What you can also do to support your operators within the tool is create a template knowledge article for them to follow. Now this is a screenshot that I took of a template that we made at an organization. We called it KCS template, and we actually made a shortcut to it on the quick launch bar of Topdesk, which you can see at the bottom left. This knowledge article had tips and tricks on how to make a knowledge article, a template for them to follow so they didn't feel daunted about how to write it, information about where you should put it in the structure of the knowledge base, all of these simple things to put your operators at ease and make it as simple as possible for them to create new knowledge. So we've nailed the process, we've nailed the tool. What about the people who are going to be using the process within the tool? What can we do to help support them? Well, there's two areas that we can focus on. Of course, you'd be expecting some sort of training that your operators will need to undertake to understand the new way of working, but also coaching. Coaching refers to what happens after training when they've been using the process for some time. Coaching is about keeping that momentum going and encouraging them to keep up with the process, even if you started using it a long time ago. And the reason why we separate both is because the research from the Service Innovation Consortium showed us that although training is important, it only leads to a 22% rise in productivity for the new thing that you're training them in. Whereas if you encourage coaching and conduct regular sessions after the point of training, then there's an increase of 86% in the process that you're coaching them. So coaching is actually much more crucial than training is to get BPKM off the ground and keep that momentum going. I wanted to identify a few kind of key tips that we encourage when we go to customers to do training and coaching sessions. Starting off with training. Training sessions are pretty much what you'd expect, really. They're an introduction to BPKM for your operators, showing them what the new process is, showing them that KCS template that you made, so that's that guide or manuscript knowledge article to help them learn what to write, explain to them tips and tricks in the tool to make knowledge management easy for them, and if possible give them some practical exercises so they can actually have a click around, get used to what they're doing before they go away. Now, as soon as you have had the training, we always encourage to go live straight away, which can be very daunting because you might be thinking, hang on, I've only just trained them. I need to make a knowledge base first. I need to make sure the knowledge base looks good so they can start using it. And that's not something that you need to worry about, because if you remember back to the principles of KCS and the way the process works, you don't need to have a good knowledge base in place. You don't need to spend time creating something for them to use, because your operators will be the ones creating it as soon as they start using the process. It's going to grow very organically off the back of their hard work. So you could even start with a knowledge base with 0 articles and go live with the process straight away. So we encourage, if you want to get maximum benefit as soon as possible, what's stopping you from using this new process? Coaching, this is what's happening later down the line. So after the enthusiasm of BPKM has started to dwindle slightly, after the first few weeks or months of introducing this new way of working, you want to keep that enthusiasm going with coaching. It's about keeping up that momentum and keeping your operators motivated for what is a bit of a change for them. Now, there are a number of ways you can do this. One of the most useful ways is through celebrating successes of your operators to keep them enthused. Now, we actually do this by nominating within each team something called a knowledge champion, and it's their job to really look after the team and help engage the team to keep using this new way of working by identifying people who might be struggling or need a little bit of extra help, but also identify people who are doing really well, sharing their knowledge articles with the rest of the team and really celebrating the things that they're doing fantastically. You'll notice your stats will start to improve quite quickly. You'll notice perhaps that incidents might start to drop. You might notice that consistency improves. Really, really crucial to share those improvements with the rest of the team as well, because that's one of the key ways to keep momentum going, because that your operators will notice a difference if they're seeing that line graph of the time spent going down. If they're seeing that bar chart of incident volume decreasing, that will really make them see that what they're doing is making a difference. Gamification can be also very useful depending on your organization and what your operators like. If they could be encouraged by a little bit of healthy competition against their other colleagues, that can be a great way to keep them motivated. And also by having rewards for people who are really taking up the process well, either physical rewards, a bacon sandwich morning, something like that, or actually maybe just more of something that gets mentioned in appraisals or weekly reviews and catch up to say, hang on, we really appreciate what you're doing, and rewarding this way of sharing knowledge. This is especially important because I think traditionally we, as businesses, we reward keeping knowledge to yourself. Because if you're an expert in something, it means you're more valuable to the business and you're more likely to keep your job, so people might be a bit hesitant to share knowledge. Whereas if we flip that on its head and say, hey, we want you to share your expertise and we're going to reward that, it makes it much more lasting and more ingrained in your culture. The Service Innovation Consortium also has some fantastic ways to coach your operators and keep them going. They have resources around something called the Article Quality Index, which is a way of measuring the quality of the articles that you're creating and how you can improve that, and process indication indicators as well, which are kind of flags that highlight how much the process has been uptaken in the organization and how you can improve it if there are areas that need improving. Now, if the knowledge managers are still listening and haven't gone away in horror at the comments of before, this is where you could perhaps come into the picture here, because this is a lot to take care of. This coaching and this culture change and this new way of working needs to be looked after by somebody, which is why we've coined the phrase or the idea of a knowledge curator. This is someone who needs to keep this culture change going, but not necessarily the person who's making the knowledge articles. And we've used the story of them being a bit like a library curator. So if you imagine a really big, dusty old library full of old volumes of information and books, and the curator of that library loves every single book in that library, and he knows where every single one is, and he's really encouraging the community to come to his library and read the knowledge, but he hasn't written a single book in the library. He just loves the idea and the concept of the knowledge within them. So that's what the knowledge curator really can do in this scene. Now, as you're probably thinking as we've gone through the process and some of the coaching and training ideas, you may have cropped into your head that in your organization this might not go down as well as you want. You might come across some objections because of the change that this could introduce. Some common objections that we hear, especially from operators, is, well, I'm not really a good writer. I didn't get into my department, be it IT, facilities, whatever it might be. I didn't get into this to write things, and also it takes a lot of time. I don't really feel like I want to do it, and I don't really want to share my knowledge because of job security and wanting to be an expert. Now, these are objections that we hear a lot, and you should expect to come across these if you are introducing BPKM. And these types of objections from the operators can usually always be solved at a training or a coaching level. Now, training is especially important to tackle those objections around writing. You need to really reassure your operators that we're not expecting greatness here. We're not expecting beautiful sonnets or works of art in the form of knowledge items. We just want good, consistent, correct data. That's all we want. Having good, correct, simply written data and lots of it is much better than a few beautifully written, crafted knowledge articles, but not very many of them. So that can be a good way to help identify those issues, and also point them in the direction of the template article that you've written to help guide them through the writing process. Coaching is really useful to help them see that, you know, if they are feeling like, oh, it's going to take too much time, or they don't want to share their information, coaching is a good time to say, oh, actually, have you seen the statistics that we've got off the back of this new way of working? Because now you've ended up saving lots of time because you're applying knowledge articles straight away. So that can help over time encourage that change in behavior. And actually, we find the operators aren't really too bad. I mean, they may have some objections at the start, but by the time they start using the process and seeing it come around and save them time in the long run, they're usually your biggest advocates, who can sometimes be harder to convince and have very different objections of their own, usually come a little bit higher up in the form of management. Now, management can be worried about having a lack of control over the knowledge base. They can worry that the operators, heaven forbid, might write something wrong in a knowledge base article, which might be embarrassing for them. Now, when we come across those objections, we always ask the same question. Do you allow your operators to write an answer for one person on a ticket? And the answer is usually yes. Okay, well, if that's the case, there is no difference between them answering one ticket for one question than there is for writing one knowledge base article, because that ticket could be for anyone. It could be, you know, the part-time worker who comes in 1 day a week, or it could be the CEO of the company. They're two very different people who could still log a ticket with your service desk. So there's no difference between them answering that ticket and writing a knowledge article that could also be seen by potentially anyone else in the organization. And it comes down to that core principle from KCS, the underlying heartbeat of trust that must be present. And they have this very nice phrase, actually, which we've got on the screen, that says, when trust is present, people do better work and more of it. Whereas if it's absent, it's a source of great dysfunction. So having that trust, really empowering your operators, giving them ownership over something they create themselves, will make them work better, put more effort, and get better results into the content of your knowledge base articles. So what about you yourselves listening? How can you get started with this new way of working and potentially introduce it to your business? Well, I always start actually to do a bit of background reading, because there's so much information out there to really get you enthusiastic about the subject and convinced about the far-reaching effects it can have. Now, we talked about knowledge-centered support and KCS. Definitely go away and Google that term. Look up the Service Innovation Consortium, whose website is there again on the screen, because their resources on there are absolutely fantastic. If you really are feeling a bit nerdy and want to do a bit of extra reading on the train, I'm currently reading a book called Collective Wisdom, Transforming Support Through Knowledge. I've only just started it, but it does seem to be very good, so I would recommend that. We also have lots of blogs online on the Top Desk website on the subject of knowledge management that can help you along your way, and you'll find within those blogs repetitions of the process that we've gone through and some of the other tips and tricks as well. You can also start by introducing some of the ideas that we've talked about that may be a bit of a culture change. So bringing in trust to your operators to empower them to write their own knowledge articles, maybe bringing in a few ways to start rewarding knowledge sharing, and changing that idea of keeping knowledge to yourself is something that we want to not do anymore. We want to share it amongst each other. But whatever you do decide to do, and however fast you want to move on this, always keep in mind at the back of your head the end goal that you're heading for. So keep in mind all of the improvements that you can make, whether it's going to make your department more self-sufficient, whether it's going to reduce the number of escalations that you have, whether you just want to have more of a consistent way of answering questions and improving the impression of your support department. All of these are achievable simply through changing the way that you manage your knowledge. So thank you very much for listening. That's pretty much everything we've got time for today. Bear with me one moment. I'm just going to see if we've got any questions from any of our listeners. Okay, I've just had a little check. We've only got one question today, actually, so I can only assume that's because everyone has fully understood everything. We've got somebody asking about how you can track your progress once you've started working in this new way, which is actually a very good question, because when we were talking about coaching before, it's tracking that progress and having those stats that will keep that momentum going. Now we have a list of reports that we use at Top Desk. Now we use them not just to track the progress of the implementation, but we actually use that same list of reports at the very, very start before we even introduce the process, so that you can do your measurements before, during, and after. And they're reports such as the percentage of incidents solved at first line, the percentage of incidents solved at first time fix or first time resolution, how many calls are you getting escalated, percentage use of the self-service portal. An interesting metric that we also use is one, the time taken. It's called time taken to proficiency for new hires. It basically refers to how knowledge sharing can help reduce the time you spend hiring new people in your organization, because knowledge is so readily available to them, they might need less time. So having those stats and reports, measuring them before you implement the process, as well as continually throughout the new way of working, is how you can track your progress. And as you track it, as we said, don't forget to keep publishing the good news and really spreading those statistics to your operators and to the business as well, to really validate all the hard work that you're doing. And I think that is... No, we've got one more question coming through. Bear with me one moment. Okay, got a very good question come through. How would you recommend tackling cultural change? That's the kind of question that I could actually do a whole separate webinar on. So we'll try and keep it short. There's a huge number of ways that you can tackle cultural change, and at the end of the day, there's no one thing that is the kind of the magic key that sorts it. What we usually say is to start at the top with cultural change and work your way down. So if you don't have that buy-in from the top level, that really this is the way that we're going to work now and this is the new thing that we're doing, then it's a lot harder to make it work from the bottom up. So get management, get that top level engaged first of all. Start introducing it early at a very sort of trickle feed level as well. So you can already start thinking of ways of rewarding knowledge sharing and bringing it up in reviews, appraisals, and talking to your operators before you even start implementing a new way of working, just to kind of get that idea out there that it's something that you want to encourage. Now that could either be by arranging a training, say, with some of your more expert guys to kind of get maybe some people on the service desk and more clued up. Whatever little thing you can think of to kind of get people in the habit of sharing knowledge will get that culture change in there early. And we also recommend doing some things such as focus groups, which is where if you say have implemented the new process and you are finding the culture change is difficult for some of your operators, sit them down in a focus group and talk to them, find out what they're struggling with, why are they finding this so difficult, is it the time that it's taking, is it another reason, and either think of a way to adapt the process, because we want to be flexible and make it work for them, or sometimes it's actually that they wanted to just talk with you and with their colleagues about the challenges that they're facing. There's that old saying, a problem shared is a problem halved, and sometimes just talking about it with their colleagues and coming up with ways to handle it will kind of really allow you to bring that culture change in as a team. There's just a few little things really. It's lots of different things that will work for different organizations. Okay, just bear with me. Another question coming in here. Okay, so we've got a question here that you touched upon the knowledge manager earlier. Would you be able to provide some further insight on their responsibilities within the process? That was a great question, possibly asked by a knowledge manager. So apologies if you are a knowledge manager, and we said that. That's a very good question because you might be thinking to yourself, well, if I'm not writing and managing the articles anymore, what am I going to do? Well, essentially, it's your responsibility to bring this entire change into the organization. So from the moment that we talked about at the very start, where there is not this new way of working and people maybe don't share knowledge, and knowledge is managed by a few people, to training the operators, to doing the coaching, to identifying the knowledge-based champions, to monitoring the content of the article, the quality of the article, organising training days to improve the quality, maybe going on, external training by KCS or coming and training at Top Desk to understand more about knowledge management. You are essentially now the knowledge expert, and just because you're not writing the knowledge doesn't mean that you're not monitoring what's going in, doesn't mean that you're not tracking the quality of it, doesn't mean that you're not integrating the process to your operators. It's just a bit of a slight twist on the role, away from kind of being the barrier to knowledge based, but more to kind of be like encouraging people to create and edit it as much as possible. And I think that's all we've got time for at the moment. So thank you very much, everyone, for your questions. If you do have any more, please write them down anyway, because even though we are kind of taking off the audio and the webinar for now, we still record your questions for some time afterwards, and we will get back to you either straight on the webinar or we'll email you afterwards. So keep them coming in. But in the meantime, thank you again very much for listening. I hope it's been useful, and we look forward to seeing you at another webinar in the future.